Good. Yeah, so welcome guys. May 3rd, or is it May 4th? May the 4th be with you, right? My son enjoyed that this morning. I actually beat him to the punch on that one. So
Nice.
uh, um, so I sent out an update yesterday and just rehash that. Hyper got some funding, which is really cool. Sovereign company is kind of leading that round, and that has enabled us to bring on Tyler and Trip full time, which is awesome. And businessloans.com went live in the last week or so, which means Hyper is out in production running, which is really cool. CityBot's implementation should go live within this month. So that'll give us 2 implementations out in production, which is good. And just a couple of highlights. Trip is starting in May, and we're tracking to launch the website probably mid next week. I was hoping to do it Friday, but probably mid next week. We'll see. But my plan is to try to live stream the rest of the development effort on the website. Hopefully that has some value for some folks that are digging into Tailwind and digging in the Svelte kit. And then really targeting June for the launch of the dev developer portal, or really our free service tier, if you will, from the cloud product. And it's actually probably more like a pilot free service tier, because once we'll probably deprecate that to a more richer service. But for now, it'll still be the same API. It'll still allow developers to get started. And the main reason that we're trying to launch that is so that as we build workshops and tutorials for people to code along, they can have an account, they can have their own place to put data, and they don't have to kind of run that from scratch. Again, continuing to keep everything core open source. That's a huge part of our mission. So as we take in funding and we bring on, Tyler and Trip, we're still going to be focused on all the general purpose components to be open source. And I think that is pretty cool. Any questions about that announcement? Any confusion? And thanks, Casey, for helping me proofread that a bit last week.
That all sounds good. All I have to say is excited to be joining the team and excited to just start writing some cool tech.
Cool. Well, welcome. We're the Hyper team of one is excited to have a couple more people working on this full time. So that's awesome. And the other thing I'm going to try to do is update the Hyper store to get the new logo and maybe some of the cool artwork from the website on some shirts and hoodies and stuff. So I think that'll be cool.
Super cool.
So the only other thing, I'll share my screen. Maybe try. Maybe I won't share my screen. Well, I'll share it in a minute. The other thing is just kind of running through the roadmap, and I just kind of did high level, but basically in May, we're going to launch the website, and I'm going to start an API developer workshop. Probably post that and get people to sign up, and that'll be like how to, kind of a immersive training on how to build an API using Hyper as your backend, and probably serverless, and probably architect, uh, mainly because it's pretty straightforward, and I think I can automate a lot of the kind of get started through Gitpod, and avoid having for anyone to sign up for an account or anything like that. Um, and then June, um, that'll probably be the date of the API developer workshop. And as Trip and Tyler comes in, we're going to start planning the cloud product, and doing some design sessions on that, and then just really hitting the documentation again. Just really taking a huge stab at cleaning up the documentation again, more onboarding friendly, and I really want to focus on documenting how to build an adapter, how to build a plugin, which is something kind of new, and I think I've got a good use case now for a plugin that I'll talk about, and then some open topics to talk about today, and we don't have to spend a lot of time, but one is as we go to build adapters and plugins, what do you guys think about kind of a bounty system where we can document adapters or plugins, or people can submit adapters or plugins they want to build, and we can put a bounty on it, or other people could put a bounty if they want it built, and then someone can claim that bounty, do the work, and if the work's successful, then they get paid the bounty. What do you guys think about that approach?
I've I've seen similar things done on projects like Sequelize. And Sequelize tried to do like the bounty system for a bit on their backlog and like open issues. Um, from what I could tell, there wasn't a lot of like interaction with that.
Yep.
But perhaps that's just because like Sequelize being a like trying to contribute to Sequelize a couple times in the past, it is a bit of a beast. And
Yep.
so that might have been more of it might have just been the barrier to entry than just people not being interested in the bounty. Um, and I think it's worth trying. I mean, there's
Yep.
definitely platforms out there that we could sort of hook into the repo, and it could like pull issues down, and it could attach bounties to them. I can't remember what those platforms are off the top of my head, but they definitely exist as a sort of plug and play thing for GitHub repos.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I,
And I think
cool.
it would be pretty easy to manage without a lot of heavy lifting. I think one of the things about it is like building out the core. If someone, someone came up and said, I would really like a um, Kendra search adapter, right, for Amazon Kendra. And, you know, we would be like, that's not right in our target right now. So that might take a little bit of time. And it might be one of those items that is so, specific that it just kind of sits at number 7 on your top 10 list, right? So it never gets done.
Mhm.
So the idea is that if someone wanted that and they were willing to pay for it, then they could post a price. And if someone had the time and wanted, payment, then they could claim that and do it. And that would be a way to mitigate any kind of you know cool stuff that could be built that's just not in our fairway to get done. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Uh, I have a question. How would you deal with the only like conflict that I could see with that is say two developers want to do this. One, is it like a first person who claims it gets it, or maybe the like would the company decide if two people want it who does it, or would both develop it at the same time and one of them end up getting the bounty and one doesn't?
Yeah, there's several ways to do that. I would, we would have some rules, but just from what I've seen before off the top of my head is when you submit a request to claim a bounty, to do it, you would be required to provide some, your GitHub account, some credentials, some background on your expertise. And, maybe there's a 48-hour kind of weighing period, right? So multiple people can request to claim a bounty in 48 hours. And if two or more people do, then the core team would have to kind of decide who's the best one for that particular one. And then within 48 hours, and I'm just making that time up, but some period of time, the claim is awarded to one person, and they have the ability to do that. The core team checks on them time to time. There is kind of a time agreement from when they start the claim to when they finish it. So if for some reason life comes up and gets in the way and they decide to bail out of that claim, then we'll reopen the claim and allow someone else to claim it, type of thing. And I don't envision that to be super interactive or at first, but I think if we put that kind of system in place, it will just refine our task to the level and just make sure that we're not bleeding any boundaries, so that even kind of the work that we do is maybe kind of a claim kind of approach, so that we've got very clear objectives, very clear deliverables, and when code reviews happen, it's all the same kind of process, so we know when something's ready to go and when to push it, etc.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense to me. I think, and maybe this is like an issue that um, maybe it's like pre-optimization, but
Yeah.
um, in the event that someone claims a bounty and then that adapter or whatever it may be becomes like a top priority for Hyper, such that like a core member would be willing to work on it. Um, do we think that, how would that work? Would we just null out the bounty, or just and then build it ourselves, um, or I guess how would that work? Like if someone was already working on it, but they were just taking a while, and then it became super high priority for the core team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can talk through those scenarios. Again, one of my thoughts is to treat it like a contract, right? If you hire a contractor to do something, usually you agree on a timeline, and if let's say the timeline, you know, is mutually agreed on to be 1 week, and for whatever reason, the person who has the claim of the bounty doesn't deliver in that week, then it's up to the moderators, us in that case, to make a determination. Do we give them an extension, or do we, revoke the claim? And I think if we put reasonable timelines on that, we wouldn't, I would imagine it would be few and far between where, a priority changed at such a rate that we were wanting to revoke the claim mid work.
Yeah. Like I said, that might be a bit of a pre-optimization issue that we don't really have to worry about right now. And if it does come up, we can just handle it case by case.
Yeah. And again, I think we can put some, writing in place that we do reserve the right. But like I said, I think, I think the thought is can we make the bounties clear enough and concise enough that they're, pretty straightforward, and the timeline is pretty clear, right? It's like, and it'll take some time for us to iterate on that to get that. And this is not something to launch tomorrow. This is something to maybe think about for down the road, like, as we refine our process. If we want to open a flow like that in place, and again, I think more so maybe for plugins, and one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about is the ability for Hyper to have plugins that kind of can sit between the core and the adapters themselves. And a good use case for a plugin is, let's say we have the data adapter with the query endpoint, and the query endpoint, basically has several ways to query something. But let's say someone wanted to create a very specific way, like a date range filter or pagination or something like that, but it's not generic enough to go into kind of the adapter. That could be a good spot for a plugin where they could just plug in a date range filter into the data pipeline, and all of a sudden now every time they make a query request, they've got this date range semantic where they can query documents from this date to this date type of thing. And then that plugin could be used on could be used on an opt-in basis, right? It's not part of the system, but if someone wants that date time filter or pagination or whatever it is, they could pull in that plugin.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, with the current system that we use for actually no, I was going to ask, is the current system that we use for composing adapters, we could use that for plugins, but I think this sits on is what you're describing sits on the front of the Express app, like, or is it like actually part of the adapter? Is that what you're envisioning?
Yeah, the original thought is to do it in the composable adapter pipeline. But again, I think we can figure out where they go. But that's my original thought, is to be able to pop them in that pipeline.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the sort of use cases that I had in mind when was building out the ability to compose those adapters, that you could have like mix-ins almost, that you could compose on top of like individual methods that could add like additional functionality. And so, yeah, I think that's a cool idea. We could definitely try it and see how it works. And I think that would open up like a whole new sort of set of like open source tools that people could build as like hyper plugins that they could just compose on top of just any particular port. Maybe there's a plugin for one particular port. Maybe it's a plugin that's sort of port agnostic.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's some cool things that really work well for that. For example, let's say, for example, you wanted to run SQL on the data port. You could actually create a SQL plugin using a tool like a la SQL written in JavaScript, where the plugin takes in the SQL and then converts that into kind of the selector query language, the Mongo type query language, and now you're kind of writing SQL, but your adapter is, depending on, is completely agnostic, whether it's Mongo or Postgres, it just runs.
I think it's a cool idea.
For me, the plugin idea solves probably what would be my greatest reservation to start using Hyper, which is a lot of times the 20% ends up being a lot more than 20% sometimes with a lot of my stuff. The only thing is, at what point would the plugins almost be like negating the purpose of Hyper? At what point would, like, if I'm composing all of my own plugins and basically creating almost my own domain specific language for querying data when I use SQL?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think if you think in terms of stratified design, which is a new word that I learned last week, so I get to sound kind of fancy, but the process of stratified architecture, right, is to really manage your levels of abstraction, and your goal is to layer them in a way that you're only kind of organizing the things that frequently change, or that are more specific, up at the top of your layer, and things that are less likely to change, that are more general, down at the bottom of the layer. And so if you think of Hyper being that very general piece, and these plugins allow you just to add additional layers, so you don't have kind of specific and general. You have specific to my use case, specific to my app, specific to my domain, right? Specific to my technology, or whatever. And I'll try to unpack that more. But like for example, if your app is primarily in the kind of domain of reports, right? It's a report kind of system, heavy read, then you may have a layer where you want kind of this date range filter at that plugin level, because it's really not your app specific level, and it's not necessarily your use case specific level, even though those use them, but you get more reusability at that kind of plugin level, because you may have multiple reporting apps, right? Kind of thing. But again, it's one of those things that it's probably going to be a whole bunch of guidance, and at the end of the day, the client will have to make the decision. And I think, I think it would make Hyper more viable, because you're really kind of pushing some of that code that Hyper is trying to specialize down a layer, and make it more general purpose.
Yeah, I think like there's definitely a risk of people that use Hyper just trying to put everything into a plugin. I definitely think, because ultimately the plugin system is effectively middleware
Right.
for the ports. And as we've seen with tools like Redux, when people see like a flexible middleware API, it can kind of turn into like a runaway train. So I think there is a fair amount of if there's a way for us to sort of coach and advise folks, whether that's through blogs or through consulting, or like just educational materials on what's a use case for a plugin versus what belongs in your business logic, I think that sort of gets us where we can have our cake and eat it too, where we're still encouraging people to not spread their business logic out across multiple places, while also providing a plugin system for the cases where it makes sense to have a plugin.
Yeah.
I have another question about plugins, and this wouldn't be probably a question that would come up as it began, but maybe it would be one from the future. So say I want to do like a query on a huge database, and I want to put 10 plugins. So depending on how it's implemented, the order that you do the plugins or like how you stack them could have like potential performance things. Would that be something where, would Hyper be dealing with figuring out how to optimize that? Or is it pretty much like, all right, you have this set of plugins, we'll start with this select all kind of thing, and then we're gradually applying these other things? Like, I guess my question is, what's the strategy there? Is that something that Hyper is going to handle, or the user needs to figure out how to do that more efficiently?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, right now we've got kind of the hook service where you can hook in and get logs out, so you can kind of see, the time it takes for a Hyper request to come in and come out. So you can kind of measure that. But it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see where that optimization comes into play. If you're using the open source product, it's kind of on you, I think. But if you're using our service, then more than likely it'll be part of our service offering to provide guidance and support on that, would be my initial answer.
Yeah, actually, that definitely makes sense. That'd be a good sell for the service as well, that we can query things 100 times faster than you can if you just compose your own plugins. So.
Right. Yeah, so I think trying to get some more documentation around that, some use cases on how to build a plugin, and really a guide on how to think about terms, application design terms in this stratified layer approach. I think that will make it pretty clear where, you know, you don't want to turn Hyper into an ORM, right? You want to still own the business rules, but there may be generic, or better said, general purpose pieces that are specific to your use case that you want kind of in that plugin middleware area. Hey, Trip, welcome aboard.
Hey guys. Hope everyone's doing all right.
Congrats.
Yeah, so that was all that I had, was really, I guess, some thoughts there. And then the last thing we were discussing last week, you know, and we can continue to discuss it, but anyone have any thoughts about Node.js for Hypercore versus Dino for Hypercore?
Yeah, so did some thinking on this. I mean, as far as like personal preference, I'm pretty sold on Dino, like out of the gate. I think it just better developer experience. Has a lot of things built in, like linting and testing. It's all there, and so I'm sold there. I guess my question is, does this produce a barrier to entry for folks that are coming from like a Node background, or are we just intending to use Dino as sort of as like internal tooling for what we use to build everything? Or if like someone wanted to contribute to Hyper, they'd have to spin up an environment with Dino, which admittedly is pretty easy relative to other tools, but that would be my one concern, is if it produces like too much of a barrier to entry. But as far as personal preference, like, and what I would like to use, I'd like to use Dino.
Anyone else? Any thoughts?
I don't have a preference. I'd rather take a slight risk really on the future than what's kind of old hat nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that Dino adoption is just going to go up as it just gets more mature and has a little bit more of a community behind it. And I think we might as well hop on that train early. I think there'll be some growing pains, but it prevents us having to do a big refactor from like CJS over to like ES6 like a year down the road or something, because we decided to stick with Node. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to go the Node route and to be able to, you know, support, it's just, you have to do CJS, and otherwise you've got just build steps everywhere. So I'm with you guys. I'd rather take on the growing pains and go Dino. One of the things that kind of put me over the top is Dino's new HTTP server. It's unstable right now, but I think it'll be stable in the next 6 weeks. Is they took the the Rust HTTP server Hyper is the name of it, and did their bindings to that, and now their speed and benchmarks are like through the roof. They are very impressive, and I think with what's going on with Rust and WASM and all of that, and you know where Dino sits is kind of exciting to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're all excited about Dino, but let's take a step back and just think worst case scenario. If we go the Dino route and for some reason we feel like we have to support like node environment or like common JS or anything like that, I think it's easier to transpile to common JS than to have to try and refactor everything over to using just ES6. Like there's tools out there, there's Parcel, there's like Webpack, dare I say. There's plenty of tools that could take our ES6 and transpile it into something that we could use to support a node environment. And I'm sure we could figure out the issue with dependency resolution. And it's done differently between Dino and Node, but I think going Dino to support CommonJS would be easier than starting with CommonJS and then refactoring everything over to ES6 so that we could start using Dino. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and again, you have a really strong argument in the sense that they've been trying to port CommonJS to ES6 for 10 years now. Maybe not 10, but a long time.
Yeah.
So.
Very good point.
And they are super smart. So it's not easy. And I think it's just going to be a challenge. It's like the stuff with ES6 for Node works now, but then if you're a library author and you do ES6, then it's problematic. You could run into things that don't work with new builders like ES Build or new platforms like the Next.js or Remix Run and those things. So it's just really kind of, if you stay Node land right now, I think you just have to stay CommonJS because that's where all the tools, it's like the lowest common denominator. There's tools built to support that up. So then that means you're kind of writing in that, older style. And you're not using browser APIs and things like that. So Casey, any thoughts from your side?
Nah, I think you guys got that covered.
Hey. Cool. So that's really all that I had. Did anybody have any other questions or comments or topics to talk through?
Not me.
I don't think we have to have like an in-depth discussion about it now. But something to just keep in mind, or I'd like to have a discussion on eventually. Right now, Hyper, it exposes like REST, and a while ago, I contributed an app, which is kind of like the consumer-facing part of Hyper that's built in GraphQL. Um, I like GraphQL. I think it's a great, but I'm also I'm mindful that I think most people are still just using REST, but is like having like a GraphQL sort of offering for consuming Hyper something that we think would boost adoption or buzz around Hyper, and if that's something we want to do, the GraphQL app that I built was more of like a sort of like a I would call it like sort of like a alpha or like a proof of concept even. But if it's something that we think would boost Hyper in terms of adoption, I'd like to start thinking about how that would look in terms of just a graph, and what would its capabilities be with respect to, would it like mirror the same capabilities as REST? There's some things that are going to operate differently, like the storage API jumps out at me. But
Yeah.
just something that's been on my mind, and I don't know if it's something that we want to officially offer as part of Hyper or not.
Yeah, no, I think it's still worth experimenting, and you know, again, I I've been kind of taking the approach of, you know, working with the two users I have, kind of identifying what their pain points are, and moving the prioritization off of that. And you know, I think to continue to build out the GraphQL, but you know, one of the things that I would be asking us ourselves is, when do we build it to put it into that support maintenance flow? If it doesn't have any customers, I think it'll just be hard cognitively to keep it up to date, right? But other than that, I'm all for it. I think that's the only question I have is if we can land some customers that want to use the GraphQL, or if we have some opportunities to use that and put it on a path to production. I think it has a more opportunity to be part of our stable suite, if that makes sense.
I 100% agree with that, Tom. I think it's cool, but if there's no customers or no one's asking for it, then I don't think we should prioritize building it. But I think if there's any sort of surveys or something that we send out to developers on, what do you think would be cool to have in Hyper, sort of deal, or what's stopping you from using Hyper? If there's some sort of like data point on GraphQL that would inform us, like, hey, this actually might be something we want to prioritize. I think that would be a good thing to have.
Yeah, and I think if you know, since you really know GraphQL really well, are there use cases? Because this is kind of this general layer, and you know, I can see really a huge advantage of GraphQL at that kind of API kind of business domain level, mainly because, you know, as a front end developer, I want to get widgets and comments and, you know, all this stuff on one call, right? And I can just make one call to the API. But at the kind of the general layer, you know, in that business logic land, is there a lot of opportunity to compose a query to get multiple you know, result sets back, right? And my main ask is, if there's something that, you know, GraphQL can do that REST can't, then that could change the prioritization, right?
I think we should define probably a discovery process that we can all agree to when talking to customers or potential customers, and then let that inform roadmap items in the future. So I mean, if you have too much of a surface area to support, it's going to be spread it too thin. So it's tempting, right? Because we all know GraphQL is highly popular, and it's tempting to pre-optimize a solution without it being informed by discovery. So it's not a bad idea. Some customers may be like, I don't know. But if we start seeing a preponderance of, I hate using this REST API because there's too many calls. I wish it was more flexible to get data out, start hearing noise like that, or ask those questions,
Yep.
How easy is it to get data out? Does it bother you to make multiple calls to connect two things together? How do you do that today? Just start doing these kind of discovery efforts, and you start seeing if there's, then you start, making them cry, see where the pain is, and try to draw it out of them. Draw the good nuggets out of them.
Cool.
I'm rambling at this point, so I'll stop.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page. As far as someone needs to ask for it first before we go and build it.
Or we ask them what they think about it and see what they say.
Right.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, just something I'd like us to be mindful of as we form this discovery process for what to build next and how to build a roadmap. Just something to have on our have in the back of our minds.
Yep. Absolutely. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Big milestone. Next 2 weeks, we should have, a little bit more progress to report, and Trip will be 1 weekend to full time, so that'll be cool.
Soon
Yeah,
we'll all have our sweet mic set up.
Yeah.
The next time you guys see my wonderful face, you should see a mic in it. Right now it's down there on the floor.
Awesome.
Feel like a Pixar promo.
They're cool mics.
They are very cool mics.
Even the packaging for it just seems very Pixar-ish, Pixar-esque.
You expect it to come to life like in Toy Story and start doing stuff.
Yeah. People are like, is that real? Is that real?
Oh, it's real. Don't look at it.
Don't look at it.
Don't even look at it. Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah. Everybody have a great 2 weeks, and don't forget, Thursday we got a React meetup, and if you guys want to join at 5. And I know Casey's going to propose a talk for an upcoming meetup, but if you guys want to put together a talk, just let me know.
What's the best place to get the calendar link to that so I can get a reminder?
Meetup.com.
Meetup. Okay. Charleston JS.
Yeah, Charleston JS. Yeah. Cool. All right. Have a great week. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Congrats again, Tyler and Trip.
Thanks, Casey.